The Legend of the White Owl. The story I'm about to tell you is not a legend. It is not a folk tale passed down through generations, embellished with each telling until the truth becomes lost beneath layers of fiction. No. This story happened. It happened in a small village nestled deep in the valleys of Puebla, Mexico, where the mountains rise like ancient sentinels and the nights stretch on forever. It happened to a man named Refugio Mendoza, a farmer respected by everyone who knew him, a man who worked the land with his bare hands and believed only in what he could see and touch, a man who had never feared anything in his 45 years of life, a man who did not believe in ghosts, in curses, in the whispered warnings of old women who crossed themselves when shadows grew long, until the night he looked into the eyes of a white owl and saw his own death staring back at him. What followed that night changed everything. Not just for Refugio, but for his wife, his son, and everyone who would hear this story in the years to come. And by the end you will understand why the people of rural Mexico have one unbreakable rule that has survived for centuries. When the white owl calls in the night, bow your head, close your eyes, and stay silent. Do not look at it. Do not speak to it. Do not acknowledge its presence in any way, and never under any circumstances challenge it. They call it La Lechuza. The name means simply the owl in Spanish, but there is nothing simple about what it represents. La Lechuza is not an ordinary bird. It is the spirit of a witch who sold her soul to the darkness in exchange for power beyond human understanding. By day she might walk among the living appearing as an ordinary woman, perhaps someone you trust. But by night, when the veil between worlds grows thin, she sheds her human skin and takes on the form of an enormous white owl hunting through the darkness for souls to claim. Refugio Mendoza did not believe in such things. He was a practical man, a logical man, a man who trusted in the strength of his own two hands and the sweat of his own brow. He had built his life on hard work and determination, not on prayers and superstitions. He was wrong, and the price he paid for his disbelief was more terrible than death itself. In the autumn of 1975, the village of San Miguel de las Peñas sat quietly in a valley surrounded by rolling hills covered in pine and oak. It was a small place home to perhaps 200 souls. Most of them farmers who had worked the same land their fathers and grandfathers had worked before them. The nearest town of any size was 30 kilometers away on a dirt road that became impassable every time the autumn rains came, transforming from hard-packed earth into a river of mud that could swallow a truck up to its axles. There was no telephone in San Miguel de las Peñas. The single public phone booth stood in the town center 30 kilometers distant, a 3-hour journey by horse if the weather held longer if it did not. When emergencies arose, when someone needed to reach the outside world, they rode or walked, and they prayed that they would arrive in time. Electricity came from a diesel generator that the village shared a temperamental machine housed in a concrete shed near the church. It rumbled to life each evening at 6 and shut off promptly at 10 to conserve fuel, plunging the village into a darkness so complete that city dwellers could scarcely imagine it. After that hour, the only light came from oil lamps and candles, their weak flames barely pushing back the absolute blackness that swallowed the valley whole. There was no doctor in San Miguel de las Peñas, no clinic, no pharmacy. The nearest hospital required the same 3-hour journey to town, and from there another 2 hours by bus to the city. When someone fell gravely ill, the village prayed. When someone was injured, the village applied folk remedies and hoped for the best. When someone died, the village buried them in the old cemetery at the edge of the forest, a place of weathered crosses and crumbling headstones where no one ventured after sunset. The Mendoza farmhouse stood at the very edge of the village, separated from the nearest neighbor by 500 meters of cornfields and pasture. It was a sturdy structure of adobe and timber whitewashed walls and a roof of red clay tiles that had sheltered 3 generations of Mendozas through summer heat and winter cold. Behind the house, just 200 meters through a thin line of mesquite trees, lay the cemetery. On quiet nights, if you stood in the Mendoza yard and listened carefully, you could almost hear the whisper of wind through the grave markers, carrying with it the voices of the dead. Refugio had lived in this house his entire life. His father had built it with his own hands in 1935, the year he married Refugio's mother. His grandfather had cleared the land, cutting down trees and pulling stumps, transforming wild forest into fertile farmland. The great Sheba tree in the front yard, its trunk so wide that 3 men linking arms could not encircle it, had been planted by his great-grandfather nearly 80 years before, when the village itself was young. Refugio loved that tree. He had climbed it as a boy, scrambling up its rough bark to hide among the branches during games of hide-and-seek. He had proposed to his wife Esperanza beneath its spreading canopy on a warm spring evening, the setting sun painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. He had taught his son Santiago to read, sitting in its shade, tracing letters in the dirt with a stick while the leaves rustled overhead. He did not know that in a few short days he would come to fear that tree more than anything else in the world. Refugio Mendoza was 45 years old in that autumn of 1975, and he carried his age like a man 10 years younger. His hands were thick with calluses from decades of working the land, the skin rough as sandpaper, the fingers strong enough to bend iron. His back remained straight despite the years of labor, despite the countless mornings spent hunched over rows of corn and beans, despite the heavy loads he had carried on his shoulders since boyhood. His eyes, dark and sharp beneath heavy brows, missed nothing. They were the eyes of a man who had learned to read the land, to predict the weather by the color of the sky, to spot a sick animal from across a field. He owned 15 hectares of good farmland where he grew corn and beans, the staple crops that fed his family, and provided a modest income when sold at market. He kept 8 dairy cows that his wife Esperanza milked each morning, their cream transformed into cheese and butter that she sold to the women of the village. He kept 3 horses for riding, and fieldwork strong animals with glossy coats and gentle temperaments. And he kept a flock of 30 chickens that provided eggs for the family table and meat for special occasions. The village respected Refugio because he worked harder than any man among them, and never turned away someone in need. When the widow Herrera's roof collapsed during the winter rains, Refugio spent 3 days repairing it, refusing any payment. When the orphan boy Miguel needed work, Refugio gave him a job and paid him fairly, treating him like a member of the family. When drought threatened the crops one summer, Refugio organized the men of the village to dig irrigation channels from the river, saving the harvest for everyone. Only the weak fear the darkness, he often said when conversation turned to the old superstitions, to the stories of ghosts and witches that the grandmothers still whispered around the fire. Darkness is just light resting. There's nothing in the night that is not there during the day. We simply cannot see it. He believed this with all his heart. He had never feared the dark, not as a child hiding under the covers, not as a young man walking home alone from the cantina, not as a grown man checking on his animals in the dead of night. The darkness held no terrors for him. This certainty, this absolute confidence in the material world would prove to be his greatest weakness. His wife, Esperanza, was 42 years old, a quiet woman with sad eyes that seemed to hold secrets she could not share, and lips that moved constantly in silent prayer. She had grown up in a village even smaller than San Miguel de las Peñas, a place called Santa Rosa de Lima, high in the mountains where the old ways persisted and the old beliefs had never faded. Her grandmother had been a curandera, a healer who used herbs and prayers to cure illness and ward off evil. Her mother had inherited some of this knowledge, passing it down to Esperanza, along with the understanding that the world contained more than what the eye could see. Esperanza went to church every Sunday without fail, walking the kilometer to the village chapel in her best dress, her rosary clutched in her hands. She lit candles for the dead on their anniversaries, remembering them by name in her prayers. She hung crosses above every door and window of the Mendoza house, blessed by the priest and anointed with holy water. And she woke at 3 in the morning every morning to pray in the darkness before dawn. When Refugio asked her why she chose that hour, she would only say that 3 in the morning was when the veil between worlds grew thin, when spirits walked the earth more freely, when prayers were most needed to keep the darkness at bay. Refugio did not believe this. He thought it was superstitious nonsense, the kind of old wives' tale that should have died out generations ago. But he loved his wife, so he never argued. He simply let her pray while he lay in bed watching the shadows on the ceiling, waiting for dawn to lighten the sky. Their son Santiago was 22 years old, tall and strong like his father, with his mother's gentle nature hiding beneath a young man's restless energy. He had his father's dark eyes and his mother's soft voice, his father's broad shoulders and his mother's quick mind. He helped Refugio in the fields during planting and harvest, working from sunrise to sunset without complaint, learning the rhythms of the land that had sustained his family for generations. But Santiago dreamed of leaving. He wanted to go to the city, to Mexico City perhaps, or Guadalajara, to study at the university and become something more than a farmer in a forgotten village. He spoke of engineering, of architecture, of building bridges and skyscrapers that would touch the clouds. Refugio did not oppose this dream, though it pained him to imagine the farm without his son, to think of the Mendoza land passing to strangers because there was no one left to work it. In the week before everything changed, small things began to go wrong. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that could not be explained by coincidence or bad luck or the natural order of things. But looking back, Refugio would recognize these events for what they truly were: warnings. Signs that something was coming. Omens that he was too blind, too stubborn, too proud to see. On Monday, the oldest cow, a gentle animal named Rosa, who had been with the family for 12 years, refused to leave her stall. She stood in the corner of the barn, her brown body pressed against the wooden walls, trembling violently. Her eyes were wide and white-rimmed, fixed on something beyond the barn wall that no one else could see. Refugio tried to coax her out with handfuls of fresh corn, with gentle words, with firm commands. She would not move. She only stood there, trembling, her breath coming in quick, panicked gasps. Probably saw a snake, Santiago suggested, trying to be helpful. Old cows get nervous. Maybe a rat ran across her feet. Refugio agreed. It made sense. There were always snakes around the barn, hunting the mice that came for the grain. He left Rosa alone, thinking she would calm down by evening. She did not. On Tuesday, the chickens laid eggs with yolks so dark they appeared almost black. Esperanza cracked the first one into a bowl, expecting the familiar golden yellow, and gasped when she saw what emerged. The yolk sat in the bowl like a clot of dried blood, dark and ominous. She cracked another, the same, and another, and another. Every egg from every hen carried that same terrible darkness inside. Esperanza threw them away without a word, burying them in the garden, her lips moving in prayer. When Refugio asked what was wrong, she only shook her head. Bad feed, Refugio said, answering his own question. The grain must have gone moldy. I'll check the storage bins tomorrow. He did not check. He forgot, distracted by other tasks, and the eggs returned to normal the next day. He told himself it had been nothing, a fluke, a quirk of nature that meant nothing at all. On Wednesday morning, Esperanza found a white feather on the doorstep. She had risen early before dawn, as she always did, to begin her prayers. She opened the front door to feel the cool morning air on her face, to watch the first gray light of dawn touch the mountains. And there it was, a feather. Long and pristine, longer than any feather she had ever seen, nearly the length of her forearm. It was white, pure white, white as fresh snow, white as bleached bone. It seemed to glow faintly in the pre-dawn darkness, as if it carried its own inner light. Esperanza's face went pale. Her hands began to shake. She bent down and picked up the feather, holding it at arm's length as if it might bite her, and carried it to the fire pit behind the house. She built a small fire with trembling hands, fed the feather to the flames, and watched it burn, whispering prayers the entire time. The feather did not burn like a normal feather. It writhed in the flames, curling and twisting, and the smoke that rose from it smelled not of burning keratin, but of something else, something sweet and rotten like flowers left too long in a vase. When Refugio woke and came outside, he found his wife still standing by the fire pit, staring at the ashes. "What are you doing?" he asked. Nothing, she said, and would not meet his eyes, just burning some trash. He did not press her. He had learned long ago that when Esperanza did not want to talk about something, no amount of questioning would change her mind. He assumed it was some women's matter, something related to the church or the household, nothing that concerned him. He was wrong. On Thursday night, Refugio could not sleep. He lay in bed beside Esperanza, staring at the wooden ceiling that his father had built 40 years before. The oil lamp on the bedside table had been extinguished hours ago, its wick still smoking faintly, the smell of burning oil lingering in the air. Outside, the darkness pressed against the windows like something solid, something alive, something hungry. The generator had shut off at 10, and now there was only black, absolute black, the kind of darkness that city people never experience, the kind that swallowed everything whole. He could not explain the feeling that had settled in his chest, a tightness, a weight, a pressure that made each breath feel like an effort. The air in the room seemed heavier than usual, thicker, as if something invisible had filled the space while he was not looking. He felt watched. He felt observed. He felt as if eyes he could not see were studying him from every corner of the room. He told himself it was nothing. Indigestion, perhaps, from the heavy meal Esperanza had prepared, or exhaustion from the long day of work in the fields, or the beginning of a cold, a tightness in the chest that would develop into coughs and sneezes by morning. He did not believe these explanations, but he clung to them anyway. The strangest thing was the silence. Refugio had lived in this house his entire life. He knew its sounds intimately, the creak of the wooden floors, the rattle of the windows in the wind, the distant lowing of the cattle in the barn. He knew the sounds of the night, the chirping of crickets in the fields, the hooting of owls in the forest, the occasional bark of a dog somewhere in the village, the wind rustling through the leaves of the kiba tree. But tonight there was nothing, absolute silence, as if someone had reached down and turned off the sound of the entire world. No crickets, no owls, no wind, no dogs, nothing. Just silence, heavy and oppressive, pressing down on him like a physical weight. Beside him, Esperanza lay still, too still. Her breathing was regular, but something in the set of her shoulders, the tension in her hands, gripping the blanket, told him she was not asleep. She was pretending. She was lying there in the darkness, as awake as he was, feeling the same wrongness that he felt. Neither of them spoke. Neither of them acknowledged what was happening. They simply lay there side by side, waiting for something neither of them could name. Then the tapping began. Tap, tap, tap. Soft at first, barely audible, like someone knocking on the window with a single finger. Refugio's heart lurched in his chest. He held his breath, listening. Tap, tap, soft, deliberate, patient, like someone waiting to be let in. He sat up slowly, the bedsheets rustling in the silence. Beside him, he felt Esperanza go rigid, her whole body tensing like a bowstring drawn tight. "Do not go to the window," she whispered. Her voice was barely audible, a thread of sound in the darkness. "Please, Refugio, do not look." "It is nothing," he said, though his own voice sounded strange to his ears, thin and uncertain. "Just a branch. The wind must be pushing a twig against the glass." "There is no wind," Esperanza said. She was right. The curtains over the window hung absolutely motionless. The air was completely still. Tap, tap, tap. Refugio stood up. His bare feet found the cold wooden floor. He walked slowly toward the window, each step feeling like a mile, his heart pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. The window was covered by a thin curtain that Esperanza had sewn years ago from white cotton. Beyond that curtain lay the front yard, the great ceiba tree, and the darkness of a moonless November night. Tap. Refugio reached for the curtain. His hand trembled. Some instinct he could not explain, some voice from deep inside him urged him to stop, to turn back, to return to bed and pull the covers over his head like a frightened child. He pulled the curtain aside. Nothing, only darkness. The glass reflected his own face, pale and tired and afraid, floating in the black void beyond. He could see nothing outside, no shape, no movement. No explanation for the tapping sound, just a branch, he told himself, just the house settling, just my imagination playing tricks. He let the curtain fall and walked back to the bed. He lay down beside Esperanza and stared at the ceiling, his heart still racing. Sleep did not come. He lay there for hours, listening to the silence, waiting for the tapping to return. It did not, but something else did. The next night, Friday, everything changed. Refugio went to bed exhausted. He had worked the fields all day, trying to distract himself from the unease that had settled into his bones like a sickness he could not shake. He had repaired a section of fence that had fallen down. He had cleaned out the chicken coop. He had groomed the horses and checked on the cattle and done a dozen other tasks that kept his hands busy and his mind occupied. By the time the sun set and the generator rumbled to life, he could barely keep his eyes open. He ate dinner with his family, spoke with Santiago about the coming harvest, kissed Esperanza goodnight. Normal things, safe things. By 9 o'clock he was asleep. At 3 in the morning exactly he woke to a sound that would haunt him for the rest of his life. A scream. Not a human scream, not an animal scream, something in between. Something that seemed to combine the shriek of a bird with the wail of a grieving woman, twisted together into a sound that defied description. It pierced the night like a blade through silk, like a needle through flesh, like nothing Refugio had ever heard before. The scream came from outside, from the direction of the ceiba tree. Refugio sat bolt upright in bed, his heart slamming against his ribs, his breath caught in his throat. The darkness in the room was absolute. He could see nothing, but he could hear, and what he heard turned his blood to ice. Beside him, Esperanza was already awake. She lay rigid as a board, her eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling with an expression of pure terror. "Do not go outside," she whispered. Her voice was barely audible, thin with a fear he had never heard from her before. "Please, Refugio, I am begging you, do not." "It is just a bird," he said, though he did not believe his own words. The sound he had heard was not the sound of any bird that lived in these mountains. Some owl or night heron, something disturbed its nest. That is not a bird. Esperanza's hand found his in the darkness, her fingers cold as ice, trembling violently. "In my village when I was a girl, we heard that sound. Once, just once. My grandmother told us what it meant. She told us what to do." "What did she tell you?" "Close your eyes, bow your head, pray, and never ever look at it." "What is it?" Esperanza did not answer. Her lips began moving in silent prayer, her eyes squeezed shut, her body curled into itself like a child hiding from a nightmare. Refugio pulled his hand free. This was ridiculous. He was a grown man, not a frightened child. He had spent his entire life in this valley, and he knew every creature that lived here. Owls, hawks, foxes, coyotes, bats. He knew them all, and he was not afraid of any of them. He swung his legs over the side of the bed and stood up. The floor was cold beneath his bare feet. He walked to the door, each step feeling heavy, each step bringing him closer to something he did not understand. "Refugio, please." Esperanza's voice followed him, desperate pleading. "I am begging you, do not open that door." He opened the door. The darkness outside was complete. No moon, no stars. The clouds had moved in during the evening, blanketing the sky in an impenetrable black. Refugio could see nothing beyond the threshold of his house, nothing but a wall of shadow that seemed almost solid, almost alive. The smell hit him first. Something sweet, something floral. Something that reminded him of the flowers they placed on coffins at funerals. the white lilies that surrounded the dead as they lay in their caskets. The smell was strong, overpowering, filling his nostrils and coating the back of his throat. Then he saw the eyes, 2 points of burning yellow high in the branches of the kiba tree, watching him, fixed on him, unblinking. His breath caught in his chest. He could not move. He could not look away. Those eyes held him pinned in place, frozen helpless like a rabbit caught in the gaze of a snake. The eyes blinked, slowly, deliberately, as if the creature behind them was amused by his fear. And then it moved. It descended from the branch with a rustle of feathers, dropping lower, closer, until Refugio could finally see what had been watching him from his grandfather's tree. An owl. But not any owl he had ever seen. It was enormous, 3 times the size of a normal owl, perhaps 4. Its body was massive, nearly the size of a large dog perched on a branch that bent under its weight. Its wingspan, half extended as it settled on a lower branch, must have measured nearly 2 meters from tip to tip, and its feathers were white, not gray-white, not cream-white, pure, absolute white, white as fresh snow on a winter morning, white as bleached bone left in the desert sun, white as the burial shroud they would wrap around his body when he died. The feathers seemed to glow in the darkness as if the creature generated its own pale light, its own cold radiance that pushed back the shadows around it. But the eyes were the worst, yellow, bright burning yellow like 2 small suns. There was no white around the iris, no visible pupil. Just that terrible golden glow, that unnatural light fixed on him with an intensity that felt like physical pressure, like hands pushing against his chest, like the weight of something ancient and malevolent, studying him with predatory interest. The owl tilted its head to one side, slowly, deliberately, the way a person might tilt their head when examining something curious, the way a cat might tilt its head when watching a mouse. "What do you want?" Refugio heard himself say. His voice came out as a croak, thin and weak and trembling. The owl did not respond. It only watched. Those burning eyes never blinked, never wavered. They looked at him. They looked into him. They looked through him, seeing everything. He was everything he had ever been, every secret he had ever kept, every sin he had ever committed. And in those yellow eyes, Refugio saw something that made his knees buckle. He saw himself, lying in a bed, not his bed. A different bed, narrow and hard. He was thin, emaciated. His skin was gray, the color of old ash, stretched tight over bones that seemed too prominent, too sharp. His eyes were closed, his chest was still. Around him white candles burned their flames, barely flickering in the still air. Someone was crying. A woman sobbing, the sound of absolute grief, absolute loss. He was looking at his own death. He was looking at his own funeral. Refugio staggered backward, his hand finding the doorframe to keep himself from falling. His legs felt like water. His heart was pounding so hard he thought it might burst through his ribs. The owl opened its beak and screamed again. That same terrible sound, that mixture of bird and woman that cry from beyond the grave. It was louder this time, closer. It filled the night, echoing off the hills, drilling into his skull until he clapped his hands over his ears. Then it spread its wings, those massive, impossible wings, white as death, wide as nightmares. They seemed to fill the entire sky before him, blocking out everything else, reducing the world to nothing but the owl and the darkness and the terror that had taken root in his chest. And then it rose into the air and flew away, silent, graceful, gone, as if it had never been there at all. Refugio stood in the doorway, gasping for breath, cold sweat running down his spine, his whole body shaking like a leaf in a storm. Behind him, Esperanza spoke. Her voice was hollow, dead, emptied of hope. "You looked at it," she said. "It was just a bird. You looked at it." She began to cry soft, hopeless sobs that came from somewhere deep inside her. "The last person I knew who looked at Lechuza with that expression on their face was my mother. 2 weeks later she was dead." Refugio said nothing. He could not speak. He could not think. He could only stand there staring at the place where the white owl had been feeling something cold and final settle into his chest like a stone sinking into dark water. In the east, the first gray light of dawn began to touch the sky. But Refugio Mendoza knew with a certainty that went beyond logic or reason that the darkness had only just begun. The morning sun rose over San Miguel de las Peñas like any other day, golden light spilling across the valley, warming the tile roofs and drying the dew on the cornfields. Birds sang in the trees, roosters crowed in the distance. The generator rumbled to life, bringing electricity to the village for another day. But for Refugio Mendoza, nothing would ever feel ordinary again. He had not slept. After the white owl vanished into the darkness, he had sat on the edge of the bed until dawn, staring at the wall, unable to close his eyes. Every time he tried, he saw those burning yellow orbs. He saw himself lying in a coffin surrounded by white candles. He saw death waiting for him with infinite patience. When the first gray light touched the window, he finally rose. His body felt like it belonged to someone else. His movements were slow, mechanical, as if he were operating himself from a great distance. His hands trembled when he reached for his clothes. His eyes burned with exhaustion, rimmed with red, sunk deep into dark hollows that had not been there the day before. When he caught his reflection in the small mirror above the wash basin, he barely recognized himself. The face staring back looked 10 years older, haggard and pale, like a man recovering from a long illness, like a man who had seen something that no human being should ever see. Santiago was already awake when Refugio came downstairs. The young man sat at the kitchen table, a cup of cold coffee untouched before him. He looked up when his father entered, and concern immediately creased his features. "Father, you look terrible. Did you sleep at all?" "I slept enough," Refugio lied. His voice came out hoarse, scraped raw by something he could not name. The words tasted like ash in his mouth. Santiago did not believe him. That much was clear from the way he glanced at his mother, who stood at the stove, with her back to them both, stirring a pot of beans with mechanical precision. Esperanza had not spoken since dawn. She moved through her morning tasks like a ghost, her lips constantly moving in silent prayer, her eyes fixed on nothing. The silence in the kitchen felt thick and suffocating, like the air before a thunderstorm heavy with tension and unspoken fear. Refugio poured himself coffee and drank it black, hoping the bitterness would shake loose the fog in his head. It did not help. Nothing would help. "I need to check on the animals," he said. "Santiago, come with me." They walked out into the morning light together, father and son, crossing the yard toward the barn. The great ceiba tree cast its long shadow across the path, and Refugio found himself unable to look at it. He kept his eyes fixed forward, his jaw tight, his hands shoved into his pockets to hide their trembling. The barn door stood open. That was wrong. Refugio always closed it at night. Always. It was one of his unbreakable rules drilled into him by his father. Close the barn door. Keep the animals safe. "Did you leave this open?" he asked Santiago, already knowing the answer. "No. I locked it myself yesterday evening. I remember checking it twice." They exchanged a look. Neither spoke the thought that passed between them. Neither acknowledged the fear that had taken root in both their hearts. Then Refugio stepped inside. The smell hit him first. Something metallic and wrong, like copper coins left in stagnant water, like blood pooling on cold stone. The interior of the barn was dim lit only by the thin shafts of sunlight that slipped through gaps in the wooden walls. Dust motes danced in the light like tiny stars. The air was cold, much colder than it should have been on a November morning. Refugio's eyes adjusted slowly. He saw the empty stalls, the hanging tools, the scattered hay. Everything looked normal. Everything looked exactly as it should. Except for Rosa. The old cow lay in the corner of her stall exactly where she had stood trembling 2 days before. She was not standing now. She was not moving at all. Refugio approached slowly, his boots scraping against the packed earth floor. Behind him, he heard Santiago's sharp intake of breath, heard his son stop walking. heard the young man's hand find the doorframe for support. Rosa was dead, but that was not what made Refugio's blood turn to ice in his veins. The cow's eyes were open, wide open, staring at nothing, reflecting the dim light with a wet, horrible gleam, and they were completely white. No iris, no pupil. Just blank, milky white, like hard-boiled eggs pressed into the sockets of her skull. They stared at nothing, and everything empty and terrible and wrong, and on her forehead, carved into the hide as if by enormous claws, 3 parallel gouges ran from above her left eye to her right ear. The wounds were deep, cutting through skin and muscle to expose the pale bone beneath. No blood pooled around them. Whatever had made those marks had done so with surgical precision, with inhuman strength, with malice that went beyond anything natural. Santa Maria, Santiago whispered. His voice was barely audible, thick with horror. What could do this? What could possibly do this? Refugio could not answer. He was not looking at the cow anymore. He was staring at his own hand, specifically at the back of his right hand, where a dark bruise had appeared sometime during the night. A bruise he had not noticed until this moment, until he raised his hand and saw it in the dim light of the barn. 3 parallel lines, dark purple against his weathered skin, running from his knuckles to his wrist, exactly like the marks on the dead cow's head. Refugio closed his fist and said nothing. He did not show Santiago what he had seen. He did not speak of it to anyone. He simply buried Rosa that afternoon, digging a grave behind the barn, while his son watched in silence and told himself that it meant nothing. He was lying to himself, and he knew it. That afternoon, Refugio walked to the village center. He told himself he needed tobacco from the general store. He told himself the walk would clear his head, would help him think, would restore some sense of normalcy to a world that had suddenly become strange and terrifying. But deep down, in a place he did not want to examine too closely, he knew he was looking for answers, looking for someone who might understand what was happening to him, looking for help. He found Don Severino sitting on the stone bench in front of the church, exactly where the old man sat every afternoon. Don Severino was 78 years old, the oldest person in San Miguel de las Peñas, a living repository of the village's history and secrets. He had been a curandero, once a healer who worked with herbs and prayers and things that the Catholic Church did not approve of. 40 years ago he had converted, had given up the old ways, had become a devout churchgoer who attended Mass every morning. But the villagers still whispered that Don Severino knew things, that he could see things others could not, that one of his eyes, the left one that had gone white and blind decades ago, could peer into the world beyond the veil, into the realm of spirits and shadows, where ordinary men could not look. Refugio had never believed such talk. He had always dismissed Don Severino as a superstitious old fool clinging to peasant nonsense that should have died out with the previous century. But today, walking across the dusty plaza with the weight of terror pressing down on his shoulders, he found himself hoping desperately that the whispers were true. Refugio Mendoza Don Severino called out before Refugio had even reached him. The old man's voice was thin but clear, carrying easily in the afternoon quiet. His good eye, dark and sharp despite his age, fixed on Refugio with an intensity that made the younger man want to look away. "Come here. I have been waiting for you. Waiting for me." Don Severino nodded slowly. His white hair was thin, barely covering his spotted scalp. His body was frail, all bone and sinew, wrapped in weathered brown skin, but his presence filled the space around him like something solid, something powerful, something that demanded respect. "It came to you," the old man said, "La Lechuza." Refugio stopped walking. His heart stuttered in his chest. "How do you know?" "Because I dreamed of you 3 nights ago." Don Severino's blind eye seemed to track Refugio even as his good eye remained fixed. It was a disconcerting effect, as if the old man was looking at him with 2 different sets of vision, seeing 2 different versions of reality. "In my dream you stood beneath your ceiba tree, and it sat in the branches above watching you. those yellow eyes burning in the dark. Don Severino paused, his weathered face settling into lines of deep concern. In my dream, Refugio, you were dead. A cold wind seemed to blow through the plaza, though the afternoon was warm and still. Refugio forced himself to breathe. What is it, he asked. What is La Lechuza? You already know. You have heard the stories. Every child in these mountains has heard them. I never believed them. Belief is irrelevant. Don Severino leaned forward, his gnarled hands gripping the head of his cane. La Lechuza exists whether you believe or not. She has existed for centuries. She was old when your grandfather was young. She was old when this village was founded. She was old when the Spanish first came to these mountains. But what is she? She is a bruja, a witch, a woman who sold her soul to the darkness in exchange for power beyond human understanding. During the day, she might appear as an ordinary woman, someone you know, someone you see in the market or pass on the road. But at night, when the moon hides and the world sleeps, she sheds her human skin and puts on white feathers. She becomes La Lechuza. She flies through the darkness hunting, always hunting, hunting for what no one knows for certain. Don Severino's voice dropped lower, as if he was afraid of being overheard. Some say she comes to announce death, that seeing her means your time has come, that she is simply delivering a message from the world beyond. Some say she comes to take revenge on those who wronged her when she was alive, that she remembers every insult, every slight, every injury, and punishes them one by one across the centuries. And some say the old man continued, his voice barely a whisper now that she simply hungers. That the darkness she serves demands souls, and she must collect them one by one forever. That she feeds on fear and suffering, that she grows stronger with every victim she claims. Refugio shook his head, trying to reject what he was hearing, trying to hold on to some shred of his rational world. This is madness. There must be some explanation, some natural explanation. Don Severino laughed. It was a dry, rattling sound, completely without humor. Explanation. You want an explanation? Tell me, Refugio Mendoza, what explanation would satisfy you? What science would explain the white eyes of your dead cow? What logic would account for the marks on your hand? Refugio's fist tightened, involuntarily hiding the bruise. I know, Don Severino said softly. I know because I have seen this before. Many years ago, when I was young and foolish like you, a man in my village challenged La Lechuza, insulted her, tried to drive her away with stones and curses. The old man's voice grew distant, haunted by memories that still caused him pain. He was dead within the week. His wife followed him 3 days later, and their children were found in the forest. What was left of them? Refugio's mouth had gone dry. His throat felt tight. What should I do? Do not provoke her. Do not look into her eyes. Do not speak to her. Do not acknowledge her presence in any way. And above all, do not threaten her. Do not challenge her. Every act of defiance only makes her stronger. Every insult only increases her hunger for your soul. Don Severino reached out and gripped Refugio's wrist with surprising strength. His fingers were cold like the touch of something dead. Promise me you will heed this warning. Promise me you will not let your pride destroy your family. Refugio said nothing. He pulled his arm free, turned, and walked away. Behind him, Don Severino's voice followed like a prophecy, like a curse, like a warning from the grave. You will learn I speak the truth, Refugio Mendoza. You will learn it when you lose what you love most. That night, Refugio lay in bed with his eyes open, staring at the darkness above him. Beside him, Esperanza prayed ceaselessly, her whispered words a constant murmur like water flowing over stones, like wind through leaves, like the voices of the dead calling from far away. The oil lamp on the bedside table had been extinguished hours ago. The generator had fallen silent at 10. Now there was only black, thick, and absolute pressing against his eyes, like velvet, like earth, like the lid of a coffin. He had told himself he would not look out the window. He had told himself he would ignore whatever sounds the night brought. He would lie here until morning. He would prove that he was not afraid. He would prove that Don Severino was wrong. At 2 in the morning, the screaming began. That same impossible sound, the shriek of a bird twisted together with the wail of a woman. But closer now, much closer than before, not from the ceiba tree, from directly above, from the roof of his own house. Refugio sat up, his heart pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. His hand fumbled for the box of matches on the bedside table. He struck one. It did not light. He struck another. Nothing. The match head crumbled without producing a spark. A third. The same. What is happening? Esperanza's voice was thin with terror. The matches. They will not light. He tried again, and again, and again. On the 7th attempt, the match finally flared to life. But the flame was wrong. Instead of the warm orange glow he expected, it burned pale blue, cold and sickly, casting strange shadows that seemed to move independently of the light. Refugio touched the flame to the lamp's wick. The oil caught but barely. The light it produced was weak, flickering, struggling to exist, as if something invisible was trying to smother it. The screaming on the roof stopped. Silence fell, heavier than before, absolute, complete. Refugio could hear his own heartbeat, could hear Esperanza's ragged breathing, could hear the blood rushing through his veins. Then a tapping sound, tap, 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 from the window. Refugio stood. He knew he should stay in bed. He knew he should listen to Don Severino's warning. But something pulled him forward, some mixture of defiance and desperate need to understand, some stubborn refusal to cower in fear from something he could not explain. He crossed to the window. His hand closed around the curtain. Refugio, no Esperanza, pleaded. He pulled the curtain aside. The owl was there, not in the ceiba tree, not in the yard. Perched on the windowsill, its massive body pressed against the glass, its white feathers glowing in the weak lamplight. It was less than a meter away, close enough that Refugio could see individual feathers, could see the texture of its hooked beak, could see the fine details of its talons gripping the wooden sill, close enough that he could see his own terrified face reflected in those enormous yellow eyes. The owl tilted its head to the left. Refugio instinctively stepped back. The owl's head swiveled following his movement. He stepped to the right. The head tracked him. Those burning eyes never blinked, never wavered. Never looked away. It was watching him, not just looking, watching, studying, learning. The way a predator watches prey before the killing strike. The way death watches the living, waiting for its moment. Refugio let the curtain fall. His heart was pounding so hard he thought it might burst through his ribs. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely control them. He turned back toward the bed and stopped. On the small table beside the bed, where nothing had been before, something white gleamed in the lamplight. A feather, a single white feather, long and pristine, lying across the dark wood, as if someone had placed it there with care, as if someone had left him a message, a warning, a promise of things to come. Refugio stared at it. His blood ran cold. The window was closed. The door was locked. The room had been empty when he walked to the window. He was certain of it. He would have noticed. He would have seen. "How had the feather gotten inside it?" came in, Esperanza whispered. Her voice was barely audible, choked with fear. "While we were looking away, while you were at the window. It came inside our house, inside our home. It can come in whenever it wants." Something in Refugio snapped. All the fear that had been building since that first night, all the helplessness, all the confusion, all the terror that had been gnawing at his soul, it all transformed in an instant into white-hot rage. He had worked his entire life to build something, a home, a family, a legacy. He had earned everything he had through sweat and sacrifice. And now this thing, this creature, this impossible nightmare was toying with him, leaving feathers like calling cards, killing his animals, haunting his nights, invading his home. No more. He snatched the feather from the table and strode to the door. His hand closed around the handle. He threw it open and stepped out into the darkness. The owl had moved. It was no longer on the windowsill. Now it perched on a low branch of the ceiba tree, watching his approach with those terrible yellow eyes. "What do you want?" Refugio shouted into the night. His voice echoed across the empty fields, across the sleeping village, into the darkness beyond. "If you have something to say, say it. Stop coming here night after night screaming like a demon. Stop leaving your filth in my home. Stop haunting my family. Say what you want or leave us alone." The owl did not move. Its eyes burned in the darkness like twin flames. Refugio held up the feather. "Is this what you want, your trophy, your mark, your way of showing me that you can reach me wherever I am?" He threw the feather at the tree. It caught the still air and drifted slowly to the ground, white against the black earth. "I am not afraid of you," Refugio said, his voice shaking with fury. "I do not believe in witches. I do not believe in curses. I do not believe in demons or monsters or things that go bump in the night. You are just a bird, an animal, nothing more. And if you come near my family again, I will kill you. I will wring your neck with my bare hands and burn your body in my fire pit and scatter your ashes to the winds." The owl opened its beak and spoke. Refugio Mendoza. The voice was not the voice of a bird. It was the voice of an old woman, cracked and dry like dead leaves scraping against stone. It came from everywhere and nowhere, from the owl's throat and from the darkness itself and from inside Refugio's own head. "You dare call me animal. You dare threaten me in my own night." Refugio's rage faltered. His legs felt weak. "What are you? I am what you will become if you continue down this path. I am the truth you cannot escape. I am the debt you owe and cannot pay. I am the darkness that waits for everyone, patient and eternal." The owl spread its wings and dropped from the branch, gliding down toward him. It landed on the ground 10 meters away, folded its wings, and began to walk forward, on feet. Human feet or something like them, pale and gnarled beneath the white feathers. Feet that should not exist. Feet that belonged to something that had stopped being human long, long ago. Refugio backed away, but his legs refused to run. The creature continued its approach. Standing upright, it was enormous. Its head reached the height of his chest. Its eyes blazed with cold fire. Its beak opened and closed as it spoke, but the words did not match the movement. "You think your rage protects you," the voice continued. "You think your disbelief makes you strong. You think you can challenge me and survive. But I have lived 200 years. I have seen 1,000 men like you, proud men, stubborn men, foolish men who would not bow." The creature stopped close enough now that Refugio could smell it. A scent of decay and flowers of graves and perfume of death wearing a mask of sweetness. "They all bowed in the end," the voice whispered. "Or they broke, then it laughed. A horrible sound like shattering glass, like breaking bones, like the screams of the dying. And it launched itself into the sky, those massive wings beating once, twice, and then it was gone, vanished into the night as if it had never been." Refugio stood alone in his yard, shaking, unable to move. Behind him the front door creaked open. Esperanza's voice, small and broken, drifted out into the darkness. "What have you done?" He could not answer, because he knew with terrible certainty that he had just made everything worse. The days that followed blurred together like a fever dream, each one worse than the last. 2 mornings after his confrontation with La Lechuza, Santiago discovered the chickens. He had gone to the coop at dawn to collect eggs, as he did every morning. His scream brought Refugio running from the house. All 30 chickens were dead. They lay scattered across the floor of the coop like broken toys, their bodies twisted into unnatural positions. Their eyes were white and empty, just like roses. Their foreheads bore those same 3 parallel gouges carved deep into flesh and bone. Feathers carpeted the ground like snow. White feathers, hundreds of them, thousands. Far more than 30 chickens could possibly produce. The air stank of decay, though the bodies were fresh. The following day brought the horses. Diablo, the strongest and most spirited of Refugio's 3 animals, had been restless all day. He paced his stall endlessly, refusing to eat, refusing to drink, his eyes rolling with fear. When Refugio tried to calm him, the horse screamed and kicked, nearly breaking his arm. At midnight, with a sound like thunder, Diablo broke through the barn door and fled into the darkness. His hooves pounded against the earth like war drums, growing fainter and fainter until the night swallowed the sound. They found him the next morning deep in the forest near the old cemetery. Diablo had run headlong into a massive oak tree, over and over again, until his skull had shattered, until his brains leaked from the cracks in his bone, until death finally stopped his flight. The bark of the tree was painted with his blood, and in that blood someone or something had traced a shape, an owl with outstretched wings. By the 5th day after Refugio's challenge, Santiago could not get out of bed. The fever came on suddenly without warning. One moment he was helping his father repair the barn door that Diablo had destroyed. The next he collapsed in the yard, his skin burning with heat, his eyes rolling back in his head, his body convulsing on the cold ground. They carried him inside. Esperanza pressed wet cloths to his forehead, forced water between his cracked lips, prayed until her voice gave out, and she could only mouth the words in silence. But the fever would not break. It burned through Santiago like fire through dry brush, consuming him from within. The local remedies did nothing. The prayers did nothing. Hour by hour, Santiago grew weaker. His skin took on a grayish pallor. His breathing became shallow and labored. His pulse grew faint and irregular. The white bird Santiago gasped during one of his brief moments of consciousness. His eyes were open but unfocused, seeing something beyond the walls of his room. It spoke to me, in my dream. It told me Father challenged it. It told me now it will take everything. What did it say? Refugio demanded, gripping his son's burning hand. What exactly did it tell you? Santiago's head turned. For a moment his eyes seemed to focus, seemed to see his father clearly. When he spoke, his voice was not his own. It was older female, dry as dust. 3 debts, the voice said through Santiago's lips. 3 offerings. You should not have challenged me, Refugio Mendoza. Now your son will pay what you owe. Then Santiago's eyes rolled back and he fell into unconsciousness. That night, Refugio sat in a chair beside his son's bed, watching the shallow rise and fall of the young man's chest, listening to the labored rasp of his breathing, feeling more helpless than he had ever felt in his entire life. At 3 in the morning, the temperature in the room plummeted. Refugio could see his breath misting in the air. Frost formed on the inside of the window, spreading across the glass in delicate crystalline patterns that looked almost like feathers. The oil lamp flickered violently, its flame shrinking to a tiny blue spark that barely pushed back the darkness. And then he heard it, not from outside, from above, breathing, slow rattling wet. The sound of something that should not be alive, drawing air into lungs that should have rotted centuries ago. Refugio looked up at the ceiling. A shadow clung there. A darkness that seemed deeper than the surrounding gloom, shaped vaguely like a human figure. But its head was wrong, twisted completely backward on its neck so that the face, if it had a face, pointed down at him. Refugio tried to scream. No sound came out. His throat had closed. His voice had fled. He could only sit there, frozen, staring up at the thing that had invaded his home. The shadow detached from the ceiling and dropped toward him. He threw himself sideways, crashing to the floor, scrambling away on hands and knees. When he looked back, the shadow was gone. But on the ceiling, carved into the wooden beams as if by enormous claws, 3 fresh gouges gleamed wetly in the lamplight. Sap oozed from the wounds in the wood like blood from flesh. In the morning, Refugio went to Don Severino. He did not walk this time. He ran. Through the village, past the staring faces of neighbors who had already heard about his misfortune, past the church, where he had not set foot in 20 years, past the general store and the cantina and all the ordinary places of ordinary life. He ran until his lungs burned and his legs ached, and he reached the small adobe house on the edge of the plaza where the old man lived alone. Don Severino opened the door before Refugio could knock. "I know," the old man said. His face was grave, lined with concern. "I have been expecting you. My son is dying." Refugio gasped. His voice broke on the words. His eyes burned with tears he refused to shed. "Please, there must be something I can do, some way to stop this, some way to save him." Don Severino studied him for a long moment, his one good eye searching Refugio's face. Then he stepped aside and gestured for Refugio to enter. The interior of the house was small and spare. A wooden table, 2 chairs, a narrow bed in the corner, a fireplace cold with old ash. Religious icons covered the walls, images of the Virgin and the saints, their painted eyes watching from every direction. But mixed among them were other things: bundles of dried herbs hanging from the ceiling, strings of beads in colors that seemed to shift in the dim light. A shelf of glass jars containing substances Refugio could not identify. "Sit," Don Severino said. Refugio sat. The old man lowered himself into the opposite chair, moving slowly, his joints creaking like old wood. For a long moment he said nothing. He simply looked at Refugio with that one good eye, weighing him, measuring him, judging him. "I told you not to provoke her," Don Severino finally said. His voice was heavy with disappointment, with resignation, with something that might have been pity. "I know. I told you not to challenge her. I know, and yet you did. You stood in your yard and shouted at the darkness like a fool. You threatened her, you insulted her, you gave her every reason to destroy you." Don Severino shook his head slowly. "Pride, always pride. It destroys more men than any demon ever could. Can you help me or not?" The old man was quiet again. His fingers tapped against the arm of his chair, a slow, thoughtful rhythm. Then he rose and walked to the shelf of jars. His fingers moved among them, selecting, discarding, until he found what he was looking for. He returned to the table carrying 2 objects. The first was a rosary, but unlike any rosary Refugio had ever seen. The beads were black, so dark they seemed to absorb the light around them, as if each bead was a tiny hole in the fabric of reality. They were strung on a cord that might have been leather, or might have been something else entirely, something that felt warm when Don Severino placed it in Refugio's palm. "This was made from the seeds of a tree that grows on the grave of a saint," the old man explained. "The seeds were gathered under a full moon and blessed by a priest who had seen the other side and returned. When you pray with this rosary, Lechuza will be forced to listen. She cannot ignore prayers spoken through these beads. They will hurt her. They will weaken her. They will force her to hear you." The second object was a small glass vial filled with clear liquid. "Holy water," Don Severino said, "but not ordinary holy water. This came from the shrine of Our Lady of Guadalupe in Mexico City. It was blessed on the anniversary of the Virgin's appearance, when the boundary between heaven and earth grows thin. Spread it on your doorstep, your windowsills, anywhere you do not want her to enter. It will not stop her forever. She is too powerful for that. But it will slow her. It will buy you time." Refugio looked at the rosary in his hand, at the vial of holy water. Such small things. Such fragile defenses against the nightmare that had invaded his life. "Is this enough?" Don Severino sat down heavily, his old body creaking with the effort. "These are tools, nothing more. The only thing that can truly stop Lechuza is faith. True faith. Not the faith of words, not the faith of rituals, the faith that comes from the deepest part of the soul. Prayer spoken not from the lips but from the heart. I do not understand. You must force her to reveal her true form. When Lechuza wears the shape of the owl, she is nearly invincible. She is protected by the darkness she serves. But when she becomes human again, when she sheds the feathers and shows the face she wore in life, she is vulnerable. She can be hurt. She can be stopped. How do I force her to reveal herself? By praying, by believing." Don Severino leaned forward, his eye fixed on Refugio with terrible intensity. "By putting your soul into every word. Lechuza feeds on fear and doubt. They make her stronger. But if you pray with complete faith, if you believe absolutely in the power of your words, if you surrender yourself entirely to the divine, she will have no choice but to shed her feathers and face you as she truly is." Refugio looked away. His throat felt tight. "But I have never believed in God. I have never prayed. Not truly, not from the heart." "Then tonight you must learn." Don Severino's voice was hard, unyielding. "Your son is dying, Refugio Mendoza. Your wife is praying herself into exhaustion. Everything you have built is crumbling around you. You do not have the luxury of doubt. Either you find faith or you watch your family die. Those are your only choices." The words hung in the air between them, heavy, final, inescapable. Refugio stood. He tucked the rosary into his pocket, gripped the vial of holy water in his fist. "Thank you," he said. "Do not thank me." Don Severino's voice followed him to the door. "Thank me when your son lives. Thank me when the white owl never returns. Until then, save your gratitude for God. You are going to need His help more than you have ever needed anything." The house fell silent as the last light bled from the sky. Refugio stood at the window watching the darkness consume the valley, watching the shadows swallow the fields and the trees and the distant mountains until nothing remained but black. Behind him the oil lamp cast its weak yellow glow across the room, painting trembling shadows on the walls that seemed to move when he was not looking directly at them. The air smelled of burning wax and something else, something sweet and rotting. The scent of funeral flowers that had no business being there. The scent of death waiting just beyond the threshold. Esperanza knelt beside Santiago's bed, her rosary clutched in her white-knuckled hands, her lips never stopping their ceaseless murmur of prayer. She'd been praying for 5 days now. Her voice had worn down to a ragged whisper. Dark circles ringed her eyes like bruises. Her hands trembled with exhaustion. She looked like she had aged 10 years in a week. But she would not stop. She could not stop. Her son lay dying before her, and prayer was the only weapon she had ever known. Santiago himself had not moved in hours. His chest rose and fell in shallow, irregular breaths that seemed to grow weaker with each passing minute. His skin had taken on a grayish pallor that made him look already dead, already beyond help, already lost. Sweat soaked the sheets beneath him despite the cold that had settled into the room. A cold that seemed to radiate from the walls themselves, from the floor, from the very air. On his chest, visible through the open collar of his nightshirt, 3 red lines had begun to form. They looked like scratches, like wounds, like something slowly carving itself into his flesh from the inside out. They had not been there that morning. They were darker now than they had been an hour ago. Refugio turned away from the window. He could not bear to watch the darkness gather any more. He could not bear to wait for what was coming. He had already spread the holy water across the threshold of the front door, drawing a line of protection that gleamed wetly in the lamplight. He had done the same at every window, every possible entrance, working methodically through the house as the sun sank lower and lower in the sky. The vial Don Severino had given him was nearly empty now. He hoped it would be enough. The black rosary hung around his neck, the beads cold against his skin despite the warmth of his body. He had never worn a rosary before, had never seen the point. But now, feeling those strange, dark beads pressing against his chest, he found a peculiar comfort in their weight. They reminded him that he was not completely helpless, that he had something, however small, to fight with. The clock on the wall showed 10 minutes past 10. The generator had already shut off, plunging the village into its nightly darkness. In less than 2 hours it would be midnight. The hour when the veil between worlds grew thinnest. The hour when La Lechuza's power reached its peak. The hour when everything would be decided. Refugio walked to his wife and knelt beside her. She did not stop praying, but her hand found his, their fingers intertwining. "When she comes," Refugio said quietly, "do not stop. No matter what happens, no matter what you see or hear, keep praying." Esperanza's eyes opened. They were red-rimmed, exhausted, bloodshot from tears and sleeplessness. But beneath the exhaustion burned something fierce, something that would not surrender. "I have not stopped since the first night," she said. "I will not stop until she is gone, or I am dead. Neither of us is going to die tonight." He wished he believed it. Refugio stood and walked to the center of the room. This was where he would make his stand. Here in the house his father had built, beneath the roof his grandfather had raised, surrounded by the walls that had sheltered his family for 3 generations. If La Lechuza wanted him, she would have to come and get him. He closed his eyes and tried to pray. The words felt foreign on his tongue, unfamiliar, like trying to speak a language he had never learned. "Padre nuestro que estás en el cielo," our Father who art in heaven. He had heard these words 1,000 times at weddings and funerals, mumbled by priests in churches he never attended. But he had never said them himself, never meant them. Tonight he would have to mean them. He thought about Santiago lying in that bed, barely breathing, slowly being consumed by something beyond medicine or logic. He thought about Esperanza, who had given him 24 years of love and loyalty, who had borne his son and kept his home, and never once complained. He thought about the life they had built together, the simple happiness of working the land and watching the seasons turn and growing old side by side, all of it threatened, all of it hanging by a thread, all of it about to be torn away by something he had refused to believe in until it was too late. Something shifted in his chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room, a feeling he could not name but recognized instinctively. Perhaps this was what faith felt like, not certainty, not knowledge, but hope, desperate, fragile hope that there was something larger than himself, something that might hear his prayers and answer them. He opened his mouth and began to pray again. This time the words came easier. At 11:30 the candles began to flicker. There was no wind. The windows were sealed with holy water. The doors were locked and barred, but the flames danced and guttered as if caught in a gale, their light stuttering like a failing heartbeat. Refugio's hand went to the rosary around his neck. His fingers found the first bead smooth and cold and began to move. The smell came next, that sickly sweet odor of funeral flowers, stronger now, overwhelming, flooding the room until Refugio could taste it on the back of his tongue. It was the smell of death, the smell of graves, the smell of something that should have been buried long ago. Beneath the sweetness lurked something else, rot, decay, the stench of a body left too long in the summer heat of flesh, falling from bone of corruption spreading through dead tissue. Esperanza gagged but did not stop praying. The temperature plummeted. Refugio watched his breath turn to white mist, watched frost crystallize on the inside of the windows, watched ice form in delicate patterns on the water pitcher beside Santiago's bed. The cold was not natural. It cut through his clothes, his skin, his flesh settling into his bones like a living thing that wanted to consume him from the inside out. And then the screaming began, not from outside, from everywhere. From the walls, from the floor, from the ceiling, from the air itself. That terrible sound, the shriek of a bird, and the wail of a woman twisted together, amplified until it seemed to fill the entire world. Refugio clapped his hands over his ears, but it did no good. The sound was inside his head, reverberating through his skull, threatening to split his mind apart. Through the chaos, he heard another sound, a heavy, rhythmic pounding, the front door shaking in its frame. Boom, 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 Refugio Mendoza. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, old and cracked and full of malice. Open the door. No Refugio shouted back. His voice sounded thin and weak against that ancient power. "You think your holy water can stop me?" The voice laughed, and the laughter was worse than the screaming, a sound of absolute contempt. "I have walked this earth for 200 years. I have broken stronger barriers than this." The pounding intensified. The door cracked, splinters flying inward. The holy water hissed and steamed where it touched the threshold, but it was not enough. It was not going to hold. Refugio began to pray aloud. Padre nuestro que estás en el cielo, santificado sea tu nombre. The pounding stopped. For a moment there was silence. Absolute, complete, as if the entire world was holding its breath. Then, from above, a new sound. Something moving on the roof. Something heavy dragging itself across the tiles. Refugio looked up. The ceiling bulged inward. Dust and debris rained down. A crack appeared in the plaster, spreading like a living thing, branching and forking until it formed a shape. The shape of an owl with outstretched wings. From the fireplace came a rushing sound. A torrent of white feathers poured down the chimney, hundreds of them, thousands, filling the room like snow, coating the floor and the furniture and everything they touched. And behind the feathers something else descended. A darkness that was more than darkness, a shadow that seemed to swallow light itself. It emerged from the fireplace in a twisted, boneless motion, unfolding itself like a flower made of nightmares, like something that had never been human, trying to remember what human looked like. La Lechuza stood in the center of the room. She was larger than before, larger than she had been in the ceiba tree, larger than she had been in his nightmares. Standing upright on those impossible legs, her head nearly brushed the ceiling. Her white feathers gleamed with an inner light, each one perfect, pristine, beautiful in a way that made Refugio's stomach turn. Her wings were half spread, filling the space, blocking any escape. Her beak was open, revealing a black void where a throat should be. And her eyes, those terrible yellow eyes burning with cold fire, fixed on him with all the hatred of 2 centuries. Now, she said, and her voice was like breaking bones, there is nowhere left to run. Refugio held up the rosary. The black beads seemed to pulse in his hand, warm against the killing cold, glowing faintly with a light that had nothing to do with the flickering candles. Padre nuestro, he began again, his voice stronger, now steadier. Que estás en el cielo, La Lechuza hissed. She recoiled from the words as if they were physical blows, her feathers ruffling her wings, drawing back. Your prayers are weak, she spat. You do not believe. I can taste your doubt. It is sweet on my tongue. Santificado sea tu nombre, Refugio continued. He took a step forward. Venga tu reino. Stop. The command echoed through the room like thunder. La Lechuza's eyes blazed brighter. I said stop. Hágase tu voluntad. From behind him, Esperanza's voice joined his, thin and ragged but unwavering. The 2 voices twined together, husband and wife, united in prayer for the first time in their lives. La Lechuza screamed. It was a sound of rage and pain combined, a sound that shattered the remaining windows and sent glass spraying across the room like deadly rain. She lunged forward. Her talons extended, her beak gaping. Refugio did not run. He stood his ground, the rosary held before him like a shield, the words pouring from his mouth in an unbroken stream. En la tierra como en el cielo. The talons stopped inches from his face. La Lechuza hung there, suspended, trembling with the effort of pushing forward against an invisible barrier. Her feathers began to fall, one at a time, at first drifting down like snowflakes, then faster in clumps and clusters, revealing what lay beneath. Skin, human skin, but wrong, terribly wrong. Gray and mottled, stretched thin over bones that seemed too sharp, too numerous. Patches of rot showed through, exposing the yellow gleam of old bone. The smell intensified until Refugio could barely breathe, until his eyes watered and his stomach heaved. The great wings shriveled and contracted, becoming arms. Thin, withered arms ending in hands that were more claw than flesh, the nails long and black and curved like sickles. The beak cracked and fell away, revealing a face. It might have been beautiful once. The bone structure was fine, the proportions elegant. But 200 years of death had destroyed whatever beauty had existed. The skin hung loose on the skull, sagging in folds around a lipless mouth filled with brown, rotting teeth. The nose had collapsed into a black hole. The cheeks were sunken pits. Only the eyes remained unchanged, yellow, burning, full of an intelligence that was ancient and utterly inhuman. A woman stood before Refugio, a corpse given motion. A nightmare wearing the remnants of humanity like a tattered dress. "You want to see me as I truly am," La Lechuza said, and now her voice was higher, thinner, the voice of an old woman rather than a monster. "Then look at what your faith has revealed." Refugio looked. He did not look away. "Who were you?" he asked. "Before this, who were you?" The creature's ruined face twisted into something that might have been a smile. "I was a mother, a healer, a woman who believed in God more than you ever could. And where did that faith get me?" She took a step closer. Despite everything, Refugio held his ground. 200 years ago, La Lechuza continued, my daughter was dying. A fever like your son. I prayed, I begged, I offered everything I had to save her. And do you know what God did? She spat the words like poison. Nothing. He did nothing. He let her burn with fever for 9 days. He let her scream in agony while I held her hand. He let her die in my arms while I begged him for mercy. A tear rolled down her decayed cheek, black thick as oil. So I turned to the only power that would answer. The darkness. The old things that lived before your God was born. They offered me a deal, my daughter's life for my soul, my humanity for her survival. The tear fell to the floor, sizzling where it landed. I said yes. What mother would not? And my daughter lived. She grew up. She had children of her own, grandchildren, great-grandchildren. My sacrifice saved an entire bloodline. She smiled again, that horrible, lipless smile. But the price was higher than I knew. When my body finally died, my soul did not rest. I became this, a collector, a hunter, bound to serve the darkness forever, gathering souls to feed its endless hunger. I did not choose to become a monster Refugio Mendoza. I was made into one by a God who refused to answer a mother's prayers. Refugio felt something unexpected stir in his chest. Not fear. Not hatred. Pity. He had imagined La Lechuza as pure evil, a demon without reason or conscience. But standing before him was something else entirely. A woman who had loved too much, a mother who had been willing to damn herself to save her child. How different was he really? If Santiago had been dying and some dark voice had offered him the same deal, would he have refused? He was not certain he would have. "I am sorry," Refugio said. The words came out before he could stop them. "I am sorry for what happened to you." La Lechuza froze. Her yellow eyes widened. For a moment she looked almost human. Then her face contorted with rage. "I do not want your pity," she snarled. She lunged at him, her clawed hands slashing through the air. Refugio threw himself backward, but not fast enough. The claws caught him across the chest, raking from his left shoulder to his right hip. 3 parallel lines of fire cutting through his shirt, his skin, his flesh. Blood sprayed across the feather-covered floor. Refugio screamed and fell. The pain was unlike anything he had ever experienced. It was not just physical, it was spiritual, existential, as if those claws had torn through something deeper than muscle and bone. He could feel the wound burning, feel something cold and dark seeping into his blood. Esperanza screamed his name. La Lechuza stood over him, her claws dripping with his blood. She raised her hand for the killing blow. "Your faith was not strong enough," she whispered. "It never is." From the bed behind them came a sound, a cough, a gasp, a voice weak but clear. "Leave him alone." Santiago was sitting up. His eyes were open focused, blazing with a light that had nothing to do with fever. One hand gripped the bedpost. The other reached toward his mother. "Mama," he said, "give me your rosary." Esperanza did not hesitate. She pressed her rosary into her son's outstretched hand. Santiago swung his legs off the bed. He should not have been able to stand. He should not have been able to move. But somehow he was on his feet, swaying but upright, the rosary clutched in his fist. "I heard her," he said. His voice grew stronger with each word. "In my dreams. She came to me every night. She told me stories about her daughter, about the deal she made, about the 200 years she has spent hunting and killing and hating." He took a step toward La Lechuza. But she also told me something else, something she did not mean to tell me. She told me that she is tired, that she has wanted to rest for a very long time, that the only thing keeping her bound to this world is the darkness she serves. La Lechuza backed away. For the first time, something like fear flickered in those yellow eyes. "Stop," she said. "Do not." Santiago kept walking. She told me that if someone prayed for her, truly prayed not against her, but for her, she could finally be free. He reached his father, helped him to his feet. Refugio leaned heavily on his son, blood soaking through his shirt, but he managed to stay upright. "Together," Santiago said, "all three of us. Not a prayer of battle, a prayer of release." Esperanza rose from her knees and joined them. The three Mendozas stood together, forming a circle, their hands clasped. La Lechuza trembled. Her decayed body flickered, feathers appearing and disappearing, human and owl blurring together. "No," she said, but her voice was uncertain now. "You cannot. The darkness will not allow it. The darkness does not own you," Refugio said. He understood now, not how to defeat La Lechuza, but how to save her. "You made a choice 200 years ago. Tonight you can make another one." He began to pray, but not the prayers of battle he had been using before. Different words that came from somewhere deep inside him, words he had never spoken but had always known. "Lord, have mercy on this woman. She was a mother. She loved her child as I love mine. She made a terrible choice for the best of reasons. Please, if you are there, if you are listening, give her peace. Let her rest. Free her from the darkness that has held her for so long." Esperanza's voice joined his, then Santiago's. Three voices, three generations praying not for themselves, but for the creature that had tried to destroy them. La Lechuza fell to her knees. The black tears streamed down her face, now cutting channels through the gray skin, falling like rain. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her hands reached toward them, not to attack, but to plead. "I did not mean to become this," she whispered. "I only wanted to save her. I only wanted my daughter to live." "We know," Esperanza said softly. "We forgive you." Something cracked. Not a physical sound, something deeper. Something that resonated in the bones, in the soul, in the fabric of reality itself. La Lechuza's body began to glow. Not the cold yellow of her eyes or the sickly light of her feathers. This was warm, golden, pure. The light spread outward from her chest, filling the room, pushing back the darkness, dissolving the feathers and the cold and the smell of death. Her face changed. The decay receded. The sagging skin tightened. The rotting teeth fell away, replaced by a smile that was genuinely, heartbreakingly beautiful. For a moment, Refugio saw her as she must have looked 200 years ago, a young woman with dark eyes and kind features, a mother, a healer, someone who had loved deeply and been punished for it. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was different now, clear and sweet, the voice of a woman at peace. "I have waited so long." "Go," Refugio said. His own eyes were wet with tears he did not remember shedding. "Your daughter is waiting for you." La Lechuza smiled. The light surrounding her intensified until he could no longer see her. Form could only feel the warmth and the peace and the overwhelming sense of release. Then she was gone. The light faded. The room returned to normal. The feathers that had covered every surface dissolved into nothing, leaving the floor clean and bare. Silence fell. Not the heavy, threatening silence of before. This was different. This was the silence of a storm past, of a battle ended, of something terrible finally finished. Refugio looked down at his chest. The 3 wounds still bled deep and painful. They would scar badly. He would carry those marks for the rest of his life. But he was alive, his wife was alive, his son was alive. They had won. A week passed, then 2. The house was repaired, the windows replaced, the scorch marks scrubbed from the floor. Life slowly returned to something resembling normal. Santiago recovered fully. The marks on his chest faded until they were barely visible thin white lines that might have been old scars from childhood accidents. He no longer talked about leaving for the city. He spent his days helping his father, learning everything Refugio could teach him about the land and the animals and the thousand small skills that kept a farm running. "I am staying," he told Refugio one evening as they watched the sunset together. "There are things here more important than universities." Refugio did not argue. He understood. Esperanza smiled more often now. She still prayed, still woke at 3 in the morning to whisper her devotions into the darkness. But there was a peace in her face that had not been there before. She had seen proof that her prayers mattered. She had seen faith triumph over darkness. That knowledge sustained her in ways Refugio could not fully comprehend. As for Refugio himself, he changed in ways both obvious and subtle. He attended church now. Not every Sunday, not like his wife, but often enough that the priest no longer looked surprised to see him. He did not know if he believed in God, not in the way Esperanza believed, but he had experienced something that night that went beyond belief. He had touched something larger than himself. He had been part of a miracle. That was enough. But there were other changes too, changes that troubled him. He slept poorly now, not because of nightmares, but because of what happened when he closed his eyes. He saw things, glimpses of another world, a world of shadows and whispers of creatures that moved at the edge of vision and vanished when he tried to look directly at them. And his scars, the 3 parallel lines across his chest that Lechuza's claws had carved. They had healed, but they had not faded. They remained angry and red-tender to the touch. And on certain nights when the moon was dark and the wind blew cold from the mountains, they ached with a deep, persistent throb. On those nights, Refugio would rise from bed and walk to the window. He would look out at the ceiba tree at the yard, at the darkness beyond. And sometimes, very rarely, he thought he saw something moving out there, a shape in the shadows, a flutter of wings, a pair of yellow eyes watching from the tree line. But when he blinked, it would be gone. Just his imagination, he told himself, just the memory of trauma playing tricks on his mind. He almost believed it. On Christmas Eve, Refugio woke at 3 in the morning. This was not unusual. He often woke at this hour now. His body had learned to be vigilant, had absorbed the knowledge that 3 in the morning was when the veil between worlds grew thin. He lay still for a moment, listening to Esperanza's slow breathing beside him, feeling the familiar ache of his scars. Then he heard it, a sound from outside, soft, distant, almost inaudible, the cry of an owl. Refugio's blood ran cold. He rose from the bed, moving silently, his bare feet cold against the wooden floor. He walked to the window and looked out. The ceiba tree stood silver in the moonlight. The yard was empty. The fields beyond lay still and peaceful. But on the windowsill, where nothing had been before, something gleamed, a white feather, and beside it a small package wrapped in paper so white it seemed to glow. His hands trembled as he opened it. Inside lay a photograph, old, yellowed, cracked with age. It showed a young woman holding a small child in her arms. The woman was beautiful, with dark eyes and a gentle smile. Refugio recognized her. This was Lechuza, as she had been, a mother. Beside the photograph lay a note. The handwriting was spidery and uneven. "Thank you for freeing my mother. I am her daughter, the one she sold her soul to save. She told me about you in the place where she finally rests. She told me you showed her mercy when no one else would. But I must also warn you. When my mother was freed, she left behind a void. The darkness she served demands balance. They are searching for her replacement, and they have noticed you. Be careful, Refugio Mendoza. The eyes that watch from the night are many." From outside came the sound of wings, many wings. He looked out the window. The ceiba tree was no longer empty. Owls covered every branch, dozens of them, hundreds, white and gray and brown, their eyes gleaming in the starlight, all of them watching. They did not cry out. They did not move. They simply watched. Refugio understood then that his life would never be the same. He had opened a door that could not be closed. He had seen behind the curtain of the world, and what lived there had seen him in return. He pressed his hand against his chest, feeling the scars throb. "So be it," he whispered. The years that followed were not easy, but they were not without joy. Refugio Mendoza lived for 20 more years after that Christmas night. He worked his land. He raised his son. He grew old beside the woman he loved. He attended church every Sunday, not because he had found God, but because he had found something else: purpose, community, a reason to keep fighting. The owls came back, not every night, but often enough. They would gather in the ceiba tree, waiting, and Refugio would stand at his window with the rosary in his hands, praying until they departed. Santiago learned everything Don Severino could teach him: the old prayers, the old protections. When Don Severino died in 1982, Santiago took his place as the village's guardian against the darkness. The legend of Refugio Mendoza spread through San Miguel de las Peñas. People spoke of the man who had faced La Lechuza and survived, who had freed her with prayer and mercy. They say that even now, on the night of November 2nd, the Day of the Dead, you can hear owl cries echoing through the valley. They say that if you visit the old cemetery behind the Mendoza farm, you might see a white shape drifting among the graves. No one knows for certain, but the people of San Miguel de las Peñas remember the lesson Refugio taught them. When the white owl calls in the night, bow your head, close your eyes, pray. Not prayers of fear, not prayers of battle, prayers of mercy. Because even monsters were human once, and even the darkest soul might be saved by a single act of compassion. And now this story ends. But before you go, there is something you should know. If you are listening to this in the darkness, if the hour is late and the night is quiet, I need you to do something. Look at your window, right now. Do you see anything? A shape in the shadows, a pair of eyes that seem to glow. Perhaps not. But here is the truth they do not tell you about La Lechuza. She does not only seek those who challenge her, she hunts those who know, those who have heard the stories. Those who carry the knowledge of her existence in their minds. You have heard this story now? That knowledge has marked you. So tonight when you go to sleep, remember Refugio's lesson. Keep a prayer in your heart. And if you wake at 3 in the morning, if you hear a sound at your window, do not panic. Bow your head, close your eyes, and whatever you do, do not open the door. The darkness is always hungry, and it never forgets a face. Sleep well. If you have ever heard the cry of a white owl in the night, if you have ever felt watched by something you could not see, I want to hear your story. Leave it in the comments below. And if you want more tales like this one, more legends from the shadows, subscribe and turn on notifications, because I have so many more stories to tell, and the night is very, very long. We will meet again in the darkness.